I am Darla Penrose, and I've always known I was meant to create something extraordinary, something that makes people feel seen and cherished, like a warm embrace in a cold world. Growing up in the shadow of the Penrose family, though, that dream felt like a whisper drowned out by a megaphone. My parents, Vernon and Glynis, were obsessed with appearances. Think country club brunches, tailored suits, and a family name polished to a blinding sheen. They'd parade my siblings, Floyd and Marla, like trophies, Floyd with his law degree, Marla with her charity galas. Me, I was the odd duck, the one who'd rather sketch hotel floor plans than sip champagne at their stuffy soirees. They'd roll their eyes when I talked about hospitality, about building spaces where strangers could feel like family. "Darla, dear, that's quaint," Glynis would say, her smile sharp as a paper cut. Vernon would just grunt, "Stick to something practical." I was invisible, unless they needed someone to mock over dessert. But here's the thing. I never imagined my phone would ring at the perfect moment years later in a way that'd turn their world upside down. Before I tell you how that call shattered their illusions at my own hotel, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. See, I didn't just dream, I built. While they laughed, I was laying the foundation for an empire, one luxurious hotel at a time. My flagship, the Saffron Vale, was my heart in physical form. Soaring ceilings, velvet drapes, and staff trained to notice the little things, like refilling a guest's coffee before they even asked. It was everything I believed in, and it was mine, hidden from the Penroses' prying eyes. They thought I was scraping by, maybe waitressing or tinkering with my little projects. Oh, how wrong they were. Back then, I was the kid who'd sneak into the library to read about hotel magnates like Conrad Hilton, scribbling ideas in a tattered notebook. I'd imagine grand lobbies where people from all walks of life could collide, truckers, tycoons, newlyweds, each treated like royalty. But at home it was a different story. I remember one Christmas I was 16, bursting to share my plan for a boutique inn. I'd spent weeks sketching it, even costing out the linens. I slid my drawings across the dinner table, heart pounding. Floyd smirked, pushing them aside to show off his acceptance letter to Yale. Marla gushed about her debutante ball. Vernon didn't even look up from his roast. "Darla, don't waste paper," he said. Glynis patted my hand, her rings cold against my skin. "Focus on something realistic, sweetheart." That night, I cried myself to sleep. But I didn't stop dreaming. I couldn't. Their dismissal lit a fire in me, though it took years to understand it. I left home at 18, scraping by in a tiny apartment, working double shifts at a diner while taking night classes in business. Every tip I earned, every late-night study session, was a brick in the foundation of what I'd build. I didn't want their approval anymore. I wanted to prove them wrong. Not with words, but with something undeniable, something they couldn't ignore. The Saffron Vale was my first triumph, but it was just the beginning. By the time I was 32, I had 6 properties, each a gem, each a secret I kept from the Penroses. They didn't know I was the one redefining luxury in their city, and I liked it. It gave me space to breathe, to create, without their judgment clouding my vision. But secrets have a way of surfacing, don't they? That annual family dinner was looming, the one I dreaded like a root canal. This year, though, it was different. They'd chosen the Saffron Vale for their precious gathering, not knowing it was mine. I could have laughed at the irony, but instead I felt a knot in my stomach. It was the night everything would change, the night I'd step out of the shadows. I just didn't know how it happened, or that a single phone call would light the fuse. The Penrose family had a knack for making me feel like a ghost in my own life, and the memories of their indifference still sting like salt in a... I can picture one summer when I was 20, home from college, buzzing with pride over a business plan I'd won a local competition for, a small grant to start a bed and breakfast. I'd spent months on it, mapping out every detail, from the hand-stitched quilts to the locally sourced breakfast menu. At dinner, I waited for a lull in the conversation, my hands sweaty as I slid the certificate toward Vernon. "Dad, I won this for my hospitality project," I said, voice shaky but hopeful. He glanced at it, then pushed it back like it was junk mail. "That's nice, Darla," he said, turning to Floyd. "Now, tell us about that internship with Judge Harlan." Floyd launched into a story about filing briefs, and the table erupted in praise. Marla chimed in about her latest fundraiser. How she'd charmed some senator's wife. My certificate sat there, ignored, until Glynis cleared the plates and tossed it onto a stack of newspapers. I fished it out later, my chest tight, promising myself I'd never beg for their attention again. It wasn't just that one time. When I was 15, I'd saved up from babysitting to attend a hospitality workshop in the city. I came back glowing, full of ideas about guest experience and design. I tried to share it at breakfast, describing how I'd learned to make a lobby feel like a living room. Marla cut me off, waving her new charm bracelet, a gift from some boyfriend named Chet. "Darla, nobody cares about your hotel nonsense," she said, laughing. Vernon nodded, sipping his coffee. "Focus on grades, not daydreams." Glynis just smiled, like I was a child showing off a finger painting. I swallowed the hurt and kept quiet, but I started keeping my dreams to myself, scribbling them in notebooks I hid under my mattress. Even when I started making real moves, they didn't see me. At 25, I'd landed a job managing a small inn, turning it from a dusty relic into a local gem. Guests left glowing reviews, and the owner, a gruff guy named Waldo, gave me a bonus for doubling bookings. I made the mistake of mentioning it at Thanksgiving. "That's industrious," Glynis said, her tone dripping with pity, like I was scrubbing floors instead of running the place. Floyd leaned back, smirking. "Darla, you're still playing with that hotel stuff? When are you getting a real career?" Marla didn't even look up from her phone, texting her friend Twyla about some gala. Vernon changed the subject to Floyd's latest courtroom victory, and I sat there, picking at my turkey, feeling like I was shouting into a void. The pattern never changed. They'd celebrate Floyd's promotions, Marla's engagements, first to a banker named Percy, then to a car dealer named Vance, while my milestones vanished into their noise. I'd hear them brag about the Penrose legacy at their country club, as if I wasn't part of it. Once I overheard Glynis telling her friend Mavis that I was finding my way, her voice heavy with disappointment. It burned, but it also fueled me. Every snub, every eye roll, pushed me harder to build something they couldn't dismiss. By the time I was 30, I'd launched the Saffron Veil, then the Indigo Crown, each hotel a quiet middle finger to their doubts. I didn't tell them. I didn't need to. I was building my own legacy, one they'd never understand. But that dinner was coming, and it was at my hotel, my stage. They'd booked the Saffron Veil's grand dining room, probably thinking it was just some trendy spot, not knowing I'd poured my soul into every chandelier, every tablecloth. I could have stayed away, let them dine in ignorance, but something in me wanted to face them, to stand in the space I'd created and see if they'd notice me at all. I didn't know then that the night would crack open everything I'd hidden, that their world was about to tilt. The spark for my empire came in a moment so small it could have slipped through my fingers, but it hit me like lightning. I was 27, managing that little inn, exhausted but alive, when a guest, an older woman named Eunice, told me her stay felt like coming home. She'd been traveling alone, grieving her husband, and said my staff's kindness, the way we'd noticed her love for chamomile tea and left extra packets by her bedside, made her feel human again. That night, I sat in my tiny office, the hum of the inn around me, and realized this was it. Hospitality wasn't just a job, it was my way of leaving a mark, of proving I could create something meaningful. I didn't want to just manage someone else's dream, I wanted to build my own. The road to the Saffron Veil was brutal, though. I had no money, no connections, just a dog-eared notebook full of ideas and a stubborn streak wider than the Mississippi. I worked doubles at the inn, saved every penny, and studied real estate listings like they were scripture. I'd lie awake at night, crunching numbers, terrified but determined. My first break came when Waldo, the inn's owner, decided to retire and offered me a chance to buy a rundown motel he owned on the edge of town. It was a risk, $200,000, more debt than I'd ever imagined, but I saw potential in its bones. I scraped together a loan, maxed out 2 credit cards, and spent a year gutting the place. I was there every day, hammering nails, painting walls, bargaining with suppliers for linens and fixtures. My hands blistered, my bank account screamed, but I didn't stop. I named it the Saffron Veil, after the spice that costs more than gold, because I wanted it to feel rare, precious. Opening day was a gamble. I had no marketing budget, just word of mouth and a few ads in local papers. But people came, curious locals, then travelers, then critics. They raved about the details. The hand-carved bar, the staff who remembered their names, the way every room felt like a story. Within a year we were booked solid and I was paying off the loan faster than I'd dreamed. That's when I knew I could scale it. I didn't want one hotel. I wanted an empire. Over the next 5 years I poured everything into it. I bought failing properties, flipped them with the same care, and opened the Indigo Crown. Then the Hazel Loft, then 3 more. Each was a love letter to the guests, but also a quiet rebellion against the Penroses, who still thought I was tinkering. Keeping it secret wasn't easy. My family lived in the same city, and the Saffron Vale was becoming a name. I used a holding company, Vale Ventures, to mask my ownership, and I stayed out of the spotlight, letting my managers take credit in public. If Glynis or Vernon ever heard about my hotels, they never connected it to me. Once, Marla mentioned dining at the Indigo Crown, gushing about the lobster bisque to her friend Twyla, and I just nodded, biting back a smile. Floyd booked a client meeting at the Hazel Loft and never suspected I'd designed the boardroom. It was thrilling in a way to hide in plain sight, but it also hurt. I wanted them to see me, to choke on their smugness, yet I couldn't risk their interference. Not yet. By 32, I was running 6 properties, each a masterpiece, with a 7th in the works. My staff, people like my head chef, Norris, and my concierge, Selma, were my family now, loyal because I treated them like gold. The empire was my proof, my shield, my victory. But it was still a secret, and the weight of that was starting to press. That dinner at the Saffron Vale was looming, and I felt the edges of my carefully built world fraying. I didn't know how I'd face them, or if I could keep the truth locked away much longer. The Saffron Vale was buzzing with a pulse of its own, my pride and joy standing tall as the crown jewel of my empire, and I was on the verge of something massive. Vale Ventures had just landed a handshake deal with a major investor, a guy named Rupert Klein, who wanted to pour millions into expanding my brand nationally. Think Saffron Vales in Chicago, Miami, maybe even London. It was the kind of deal that could rewrite my future, cement everything I'd bled for. I spent that morning in my office, tucked behind the hotel's kitchen, reviewing contracts with my lawyer, Doreen. She was all business, her glasses sliding down her nose as she flagged clauses. "Darla, this is your moment," she said, tapping the papers. "Sign this, and you're not just a player, you're the game." I nodded, my stomach a mix of nerves and fire, but even with that high, a shadow loomed. The Penrose family dinner, set for tonight, right here in my own dining room. I'd avoided these dinners for years, making excuses. Work, travel, a convenient flu. But this time, Glynis had cornered me at a cousin's wedding, her voice syrupy but firm. "Darla, you will be there. It's tradition." I couldn't wiggle out without raising flags, and part of me was curious, maybe even reckless. They'd booked the Saffron Vale's grand dining room, oblivious to the fact that I owned it. The irony was almost funny, but it also made my skin crawl. Facing Vernon's gruff disapproval, Glynis's pitying smiles, Floyd's smug lectures, and Marla's distracted chatter in the space I'd built, felt like walking into a lion's den, with a stake tied to my back. Still, I told myself I could handle it. I'd smile, nod, and slip out early. No big revelations, no drama. Just survive. I spent the afternoon prepping, though not for the dinner itself. I walked the hotel, checking every detail like a general before battle. The dining room gleamed, crystal chandeliers casting soft light, tables set with linens I'd chosen myself, staff moving like a well-oiled machine. Norris, my chef, was tweaking the menu, muttering about truffle reductions. Selma, my concierge, was training a new hire, emphasizing how to read a guest's mood. "It's about heart, not just service," she said, echoing my own mantra. I caught my reflection in a gilded mirror, dark circles under my eyes but my jaw set. This was my domain, my proof. The Penroses could sneer all they wanted. They were on my turf now. As the clock ticked closer to 7, I changed in my office, swapping my usual jeans for a simple black dress, understated but sharp. I didn't want to stand out. My phone buzzed with a text from Rupert. "Confirming dinner tomorrow to finalize. You're killing it, Darla." I smiled, but my hand shook as I pocketed the phone. The dinner wasn't just a family obligation, it was a collision of my two worlds. I knew the Penroses would do what they always did. prop up Floyd's latest courtroom win, fawn over Marla's engagement to Vance, and toss me a few crumbs of condescension. I could already hear Vernon's voice. Darla, still chasing those hotel dreams? Or Glynis's, "You'll find your place eventually, dear." I wasn't sure I could stomach it, not here, where every inch of the place screamed my success. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The dining room was ready, the staff briefed to treat the Penrose party like any VIPs. No hints, no slip-ups. I'd play my part, keep my secret locked tight. But as I stepped into the hallway, the knot in my gut tightened. Something told me this night wouldn't go as planned, that the walls I'd built between my life and theirs were about to crack. I just didn't know how loud the break would be. The grand dining room of the Saffron Vale was a vision, all soft gold light and clinking crystal, but as I stepped inside it felt like walking into a trap. The Penrose clan was already seated at the long, polished table, their voices a familiar hum of self-congratulation. Vernon sat at the head, his gray hair slicked back, looking like he'd just stepped out of a boardroom. Glynis, in a pearl-draped dress, was fussing over a wineglass's placement. Floyd, tie loosened, was gesturing animatedly, probably recounting some courtroom triumph to Marla, who was fiddling with her engagement ring from Vance, a gaudy thing that caught the light. I slipped into my seat, the one closest to the door, hoping to blend into the wallpaper. No such luck. Glynis spotted me, her smile tight. "Darla, you made it," she said, like I'd just crawled out of a ditch. "We were wondering if you'd show." I forced a nod, murmuring, "Wouldn't miss it." The air was thick with their usual perfume, judgment masked as concern. Vernon barely glanced my way, but Floyd leaned forward, his smirk sharp. "So Darla, still slinging coffee at that diner?" He chuckled, like it was a clever jab. I could have corrected him, told him I hadn't worked a diner in years, but I just shrugged. Something like that. Marla didn't look up from her phone, texting furiously, probably to her friend Twyla about the fabulous venue. The irony burned. They were dining in my masterpiece, praising its elegance, oblivious that I'd built it. The appetizers arrived, Norris's crab bisque, a guest favorite, and the table shifted to small talk, which was anything but small. Glynis gushed about Marla's wedding plans, how Vance had booked a chateau in France. "It's all so sophisticated," she said, her eyes sliding to me, heavy with pity. "Darla, you'll find your path someday." I spooned my bisque, biting back a retort. Vernon chimed in, praising Floyd's latest case, some high-profile merger. "That's the Penrose name at work," he said, chest puffed. I wanted to scream that the Penrose name was on every deed of my hotels, but I stayed silent, my knuckles white around my spoon. Then came the backhanded compliments, sharp as knives. Floyd, swirling his wine, said, "Darla, you've got that tenacity, like a dog with a bone, huh?" He laughed, and Marla finally looked up, giggling. "Yeah, it's cute how you keep at it, whatever it is." Glynis patted my hand, her rings cold. "You're so independent, dear. Not everyone needs to shine." Each word was a jab, dressed up as kindness, and I felt the old ache in my chest, the one that used to send me crying to my room. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I glanced around the room, my room, at the staff moving seamlessly, the guests at other tables smiling, and it steadied me. This was my world, not theirs. Still, the barrage wore me down. Vernon, now on his second scotch, fixed me with a look. "Darla, when are you going to get serious? You're not young anymore." I opened my mouth, then closed it. What could I say that they'd hear? The table moved on, back to Floyd's brilliance, Marla's glamour, leaving me to pick at my entree, roasted quail, perfectly plated. I caught Selma's eye across the room. She gave me a subtle nod, like she knew I was drowning. I clung to that, to the knowledge that this space, these people, were mine. But as the dessert course loomed, I felt the weight of their contempt pressing harder. And I wondered how much more I could take before something snapped. The night was young, and the Penroses were just getting started. The dessert plates, Norris's lavender panna cotta, dusted with edible gold, had just been set down when the air in the dining room shifted, like the moment before a storm breaks. I was still reeling from their earlier jabs, my fork hovering over the untouched dessert, when Vernon cleared his throat, the sound heavy with purpose. The table fell silent, all eyes on him, even Marla's, who'd finally put her phone down. Glynis straightened, her smile gone, replaced by something colder. Floyd leaned back, arms crossed, a glint in his eye like he knew what was coming. I felt my pulse quicken, a warning I couldn't name. This wasn't just another lecture, this was something else. Darla, Vernon began, his voice low, deliberate. We've been patient with you. He paused, letting the words hang, and I felt every guest in the Saffron Vale's dining room vanish, the world narrowing to this table. You've had your experiments, your little hobbies, but it's time we address the truth. Glynis nodded, her lips pursed, and I saw Marla glance at Floyd, a smirk flickering. My stomach twisted. You've brought nothing to the Penrose name, Vernon continued, his eyes boring into me. Floyd upholds our legacy in the courts. Marla elevates it with her influence. But you're a disappointment, drifting without purpose. I opened my mouth, but no words came. The room felt too warm, the chandelier light too bright. Glynis chimed in, her voice softer but no less cutting. We've given you time, Darla, but you've squandered it. We can't keep pretending you're part of this family's future. My fork clattered to the plate, the sound sharp in the silence. Floyd leaned forward, his tone almost gleeful. Let's be honest, Darla, you're not cut out for this. You never were. Marla didn't speak, but her pitying look was worse than words. I felt like I was 15 again, my sketches ignored, my dreams dismissed, but this was different, this was final. Vernon raised his glass, not for a toast, but as a gavel. We've decided, he said, to formally distance ourselves from you. You're no longer welcome at family functions, no longer tied to our name. It's for the best. The words hit like a slap, each one stripping away the fragile hope I'd clung to. The hope that they'd one day see me. I looked around the table. Vernon's stern jaw, Glynis's feigned sadness, Floyd's smug satisfaction, Marla's indifference, and realized they'd planned this. This dinner in my own hotel was their stage to cast me out. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled, but I pressed them to the table, anchoring myself. The dining room buzzed faintly, other guests, my staff, life going on, but I was drowning. I wanted to scream, to tell them they were sitting in my empire, that every detail of this night was mine. But my throat was tight, my voice gone. I saw Selma across the room, her brow furrowed, sensing something was wrong. Norris was at the kitchen door, watching. They were my people, my real family, but even that couldn't soften the blow. The Penroses had declared me worthless, and the weight of it was crushing. I pushed my chair back, ready to flee, to hide in my office and let the tears come. I didn't care about keeping my secret anymore. I just wanted out. But as I stood, my phone buzzed in my pocket, sharp and insistent. I ignored it, but it buzzed again, then again. Vernon frowned, annoyed, but I pulled it out, my hands moving on instinct. The screen lit up with Rupert Klein's name, my investor, and a single word, urgent. I froze, my heart pounding. Something told me this call wasn't just about the deal, it was about to change everything. The phone's buzzing cut through the dining room's tension like a blade, and I stood there, frozen, Rupert Klein's name glowing on the screen. Vernon's frown deepened, his scotch glass thudding to the table. Darla, really? Now? He snapped, as if my existence was the interruption. Glynis sighed, her pearls clicking softly, while Floyd snorted, muttering, typical. Marla just stared, her dessert spoon paused midair. I should have silenced the phone, slipped out, let their verdict sink in private. But something in me, maybe defiance, maybe desperation, made me answer. I pressed the phone to my ear, turning slightly from the table, my voice low. Rupert, this isn't a good time. Darla, you'll want to hear this. Rupert's voice crackled, urgent, excited. The board just voted. They're doubling the investment, $50 million effective tomorrow, but they need you at the Saffron Vale tonight to seal it. Where are you? My breath caught. I glanced at the table, at the Penroses' impatient faces, then at the dining room, my dining room, with its velvet chairs and flickering candles. I'm here, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Rupert laughed. Perfect, I'm 5 minutes out. Meet me in the lobby, this is your moment, kid. He hung up, and I stood there, the phone still warm against my cheek, the world tilting. I turned back to the table, and Vernon's voice boomed. Sit down, Darla, we're not finished. But I didn't move. Something was shifting inside me, like a dam cracking. I looked at them, Vernon's scowl, Glynis's pursed lips, Floyd's smirk, Marla's bored gaze, and saw strangers, not family. They'd just disowned me, declared me nothing, in the heart of the empire I'd built. And now, Rupert was coming here, to my hotel, to hand me the keys to a future they couldn't even dream of. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Why are you smiling? Floyd snapped, leaning forward. This isn't a joke. I didn't answer, just slipped my phone into my pocket and straightened, feeling the room come into focus. Selma was watching from the corner, her eyes wide, sensing the shift. Norris had stepped out of the kitchen, his apron still on, staring like he knew something was about to break. Then the dining room's double doors swung open, and Rupert strode in, all energy and expensive cologne, his assistant, Lyle, trailing with a briefcase. He spotted me and grinned, oblivious to the Penrose's confusion. "Darla Penrose," he called, loud enough for every guest to hear, "owner of Vale Ventures, queen of the Saffron Vale, ready to make history?" The table went silent, forks clattering. Vernon's face drained of color, his glass trembling in his hand. Glynis's mouth opened, then closed, her pearls forgotten. Floyd's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed stare. Marla dropped her spoon, her ring glinting as she gaped. "Owner?" Glynis whispered, her voice cracking. Rupert, still clueless, clapped me on the shoulder. "This woman's about to take hospitality global. 50 million says so." He turned to the table, assuming they were friends. "You must be proud. Darla's a genius." I could have let the moment sit, let their shock fester, but I met Vernon's eyes and saw something new. Panic. He opened his mouth, maybe to salvage his pride, but I cut him off. My voice steady, louder than I'd planned. "They didn't know, Rupert. They thought I was a failure." The words hung there, raw, true. Rupert blinked, then laughed, thinking it was a joke. The Penroses didn't laugh. Floyd stammered, You own this place?" Marla's eyes darted around like she was seeing the room, my room, for the first time. Glynis reached for Vernon's hand, but he pulled away, staring at me like I was a stranger. I felt the weight of years lift, their judgment crumbling under the truth. This was my stage, my triumph, and they were just guests in it. Rupert was still talking, something about contracts, but I barely heard him. The Penroses' world was collapsing, and I was ready to walk away from its ruins. The dining room felt like a stage, the chandelier light pinning me in a spotlight as the Penroses stared, their faces a mix of shock and something uglier, shame maybe, or envy. Rupert was still grinning, oblivious, chatting about expansion plans to Lyle, who was flipping through papers in his briefcase. I stood there, heart pounding but steady, watching my family scramble to rewrite the narrative they'd just burned to the ground. Vernon's jaw worked silently, like he was chewing on words he couldn't spit out. Glynis clutched her napkin, her eyes darting between me and the table, as if the panna cotta could explain this. Floyd's hands were fists, his lawyer cool gone, and Marla was staring at her wineglass, her cheeks flushed, like she'd been slapped. "Darla," Glynis finally managed, her voice thin, "why didn't you tell us?" It wasn't a question, it was a plea, dressed up as concern, and it lit a fire in me. I could have played nice. I'd let them save face, but I was done with their script. "Tell you?" I said, loud enough for nearby tables to glance over. "You never asked, you never listened. You were too busy calling me a failure, disowning me in my own hotel." The word "my" landed like a grenade. Floyd flinched, and Vernon's scotch glass hit the table hard. Marla whispered, "Your hotel?" like she was testing the words, and I nodded, letting it sink in. I turned to Vernon, meeting his eyes, the ones that used to make me shrink. "You said I brought nothing to the Penrose name. Look around. This is mine. The saffron veil, the indigo crown, every brick, every guest. Mine. While you were parading Floyd's briefs and Marla's ring, I built an empire." My voice was calm, but it carried, and I saw Selma and Norris by the kitchen door, their faces glowing with pride. Rupert, catching on, let out a low whistle. "Damn, Darla, you don't mess around." Glynis tried to recover, her smile wobbling. "We're proud, darling, we just didn't know." It was a lie, and we all heard it. Floyd jumped in, his tone desperate. "You could have said something, Darla. We'd have supported you." I laughed, sharp and short, and it felt good. "Supported me? You mocked my dreams, ignored my wins, and tonight you cut me off like I was trash. Don't rewrite history now." Marla reached for my hand, her eyes wet, maybe with guilt, maybe with fear of losing her status. "Darla, please, we're family." I pulled away. "Family doesn't bury you and then beg when you rise." Vernon stood, his chair scraping, trying to reclaim control. "This is no way to speak to us," he growled, but it was hollow. I stepped closer, my voice low, final. "You don't get to lecture me anymore. You're guests here, nothing more. Enjoy your dessert." I turned to Rupert, who was watching like this was the best show in town. Let's go sign those papers. He nodded, grabbing his briefcase, and I walked toward the lobby, my heels clicking on the marble I'd chosen. The Penroses didn't follow, didn't call out. They sat there, silent, their perfect world cracked open. As I passed the kitchen, Norris caught my eye, giving me a slow nod, like he'd been waiting for this. Selma slipped me a quick thumbs up, her grin fierce. The dining room buzzed with whispers from other guests, but I didn't care. I'd unmasked the Penroses' hypocrisy. Not with a scream, but with the truth. And it felt like shedding a skin I'd outgrown. The lobby doors loomed ahead, and beyond them, my future. $50 million, a global stage, and a life I'd built without their shadows. I didn't look back. The lobby of the Saffron Vale felt like a sanctuary as I stepped away from the dining room's chaos, the weight of the Penroses' stunned silence behind me. Rupert was already at the front desk, joking with Lyle about some golf game, his briefcase open with contracts waiting. I could have jumped into the deal right then, but I needed a moment, a breath, to feel the ground under me. That's when I saw Norris and Selma waiting by the bar, their faces lit with something warm, something real. They weren't just my staff, they were my chosen family, the ones who'd seen me at 3 a.m. cursing over broken pipes, who'd celebrated every new property with cheap wine and bad karaoke. I walked over, and Selma didn't hesitate, pulling me into a hug. "You slayed 'em, boss," she whispered, her voice thick. Norris, usually all gruff, just grinned, handing me a glass of sparkling water. "About time they knew who you are." We slid into a corner booth, the kind I'd designed for intimate chats with plush seats and a view of the lobby's cascading fountain. The contrast hit me hard. The Penroses' cold, calculated dinner versus this, 3 of us, laughing, unguarded, in a space I'd built. Norris leaned back, his chef's jacket unbuttoned, and started mimicking Vernon's scowl, puffing out his chest. "The Penrose name, bah!" he growled, and Selma cackled, nearly spilling her drink. I laughed too, the kind that hurts your sides, the kind I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just relief, it was belonging. These were my people, not because of blood, but because of heart. Selma sobered up, her eyes soft. "Darla, I saw their faces when you dropped the truth. They looked like they'd swallowed lemons." She reached for my hand, her rings clinking against the table. "You didn't just win tonight, you rewrote the story." Norris nodded, sipping his soda. "They thought they were the main characters. Nope. You're the damn book." Their words settled into me, filling the cracks the Penroses had left. I told them about the $50 million deal, about Rupert's call, and they whooped so loud a couple at the bar turned to stare. Selma raised her glass. "To Darla Penrose, queen of everything." We clinked, and for the first time that night I felt light. I glanced at the dining room doors, half expecting Glynis or Floyd to barge in, demanding apologies or explanations. But they didn't. They were probably still at the table, picking at their panna cotta, trying to piece together their pride. I didn't care. Here, with Norris and Selma, I was home. We swapped stories. Norris about the time he accidentally set a stovetop on fire during a critic's visit, Selma about a guest who proposed to his girlfriend in the lobby, botching every line but winning her over. These were the moments that fueled me, the human mess and magic of hospitality, not the Penroses' sterile legacy. As we talked, I noticed the lobby humming, guests checking in, a pianist playing softly, my staff moving with the quiet grace I'd trained them for. This was my world, built from sweat and stubbornness, and it was alive. Norris caught me staring and nudged me. "You're not just a boss, Darla, you're a damn artist." Selma nodded, her grin fierce. "And this is your canvas." Their faith in me, so different from the Penroses' contempt, was a gift I hadn't known I needed. The night wasn't over. Rupert was waiting, the deal looming, but right then in that booth, I felt whole, surrounded by allies who saw me, not the shadow my family cast. The high from that booth with Norris and Selma carried me through signing Rupert's contracts, my pen steady as I locked in the $50 million deal under the Saffron Vale's gilded ceiling. But the next morning, reality hit like a cold shower. My phone was a war zone, missed calls from Glynis, texts from Floyd, even a voicemail from Marla, her voice shaky, saying, "Darla, we need to talk." Vernon hadn't reached out, but I could picture him stewing, his pride bruised. They weren't apologizing, not really, just scrambling to rewrite the narrative now that they knew I wasn't the failure they'd painted. I sat in my office, the city waking up outside, and felt the weight of their sudden attention. It wasn't love, it was opportunism, and I wasn't falling for it. I deleted their messages, but the fallout wasn't just digital. By noon, word had spread. Probably Marla gossiping to her friend Twyla, who told half the country club. My cousin Elmer, a decent guy who'd always stayed neutral, texted me, "Heard you own the Saffron Vale, Penroses are losing it, you okay?" I replied, better than ever, but I wasn't naive. The Penroses would try to claw their way back into my life, not because they valued me, but because my success was a shiny new toy they wanted to claim. I needed boundaries, steel ones, to protect the world I'd built. First I called Doreen, my lawyer. She was in her office, coffee in hand, ready to roll. "Darla, they don't get to waltz in now," she said, her voice sharp. We drafted a formal letter, sent to Vernon and Glynis, stating I'd honor their decision to distance me. No contact, no family events, no claims to my business. It was cold, legal, final. I didn't hate them. I just didn't need them. Doreen faxed it by lunch, and I felt a knot loosen in my chest. Next I blocked their numbers. Floyd tried calling from a new one, but I let it go to voicemail, then deleted it unheard. Marla's text stopped after I didn't respond. Silence was my shield. At the Saffron Vale, I doubled down on my real family, my team. I called a staff meeting, not to spill the drama, but to reinforce our vision. In the ballroom, with its soaring windows, I stood before Norris, Selma, and the others, chefs, housekeepers, bellhops, and told them about the expansion. "This isn't just my win," I said, my voice steady. "It's ours. Every guest you've welcomed, every detail you've nailed, built this." They cheered, and Selma started a chant of Vale Ventures that echoed off the walls. I gave them raises, effective immediately, and promised input on new properties. They weren't just employees. They were partners in my freedom. Outside work, I leaned on allies like Eunice, the guest who'd sparked my dream years ago. She'd become a friend, visiting often, and when I told her about the dinner over coffee, she hugged me tight. "You don't need their name, Darla. You've got your own." Her words stuck, grounding me. I started saying no to anything that smelled like Penrose drama. Cousin Elmer's invite to a family barbecue, a charity event Glynis chaired. My life was mine now, not a stage for their redemption arc. The Saffron Vale hummed around me, guests laughing in the lobby, my staff moving with purpose. I'd built this fortress, and no one was breaching it. The Penroses could keep their legacy, I was writing my own, and it felt like flying. With the Penroses cut off and my empire humming, I turned my focus to something bigger than revenge or redemption, using my success to make a difference, to carve my name into the world on my own terms. The $50 million from Rupert's deal was a rocket booster, but it wasn't just about opening new saffron vales in glossy cities. I wanted my hotels to be more than luxury. I wanted them to be havens, places where people like Eunice, grieving or lost, could find warmth, or where kids like I'd been, dreaming big in a cold family, could see possibility. The Penrose name had been a cage, but now it was mine to redefine, not as their trophy, but as a beacon. I started with the Saffron Vales community program, something I'd sketched out years ago but never had the funds to launch. I called it Vale Cares, and it was my heart on paper. Free stays for families in crisis. Think parents with kids in hospitals or folks displaced by floods. I worked with Selma to train staff on trauma sensitivity, ensuring guests felt safe, not pitied. Norris tweaked menus for picky eaters or dietary needs, grumbling but grinning as he perfected a kid-friendly mac and cheese. We piloted it locally, and within weeks I got a letter from a mom named Thelma, whose son was in chemo. "Your hotel gave us a home when we had none," she wrote. I framed it in my office, next to my first business plan. That was the Penrose legacy now. Mine, not Vernon's. Then I went bigger. I partnered with a nonprofit run by a guy named Grover, who mentored at-risk teens. We set up internships at my hotels, housekeeping, front desk, even kitchen work with Norris. I met the first group, nervous kids with guarded eyes, and saw myself in them, the kid who'd scribbled hotel plans under a flashlight. One girl, Patsy, shy but sharp, learned concierge work from Selma and started dreaming of college. I didn't know people like me could do this. She told me, clutching a Vale Ventures name tag. I gave her a scholarship fund, no strings attached. Every kid who finished the program got one. That was my name at work, not Floyd's courtroom wins or Marla's galas. I didn't stop there. I used my platform to spotlight small businesses, like the bakery run by a couple, Waldo and Mavis, who supplied our pastries. Their shop boomed after I featured them in our guest magazine, and they named a scone after me, Darla's Delight, flaky and a little spicy. I laughed when they showed me, but it meant something. I was building a network, not just an empire, connecting people who believed in heart over hype. My hotels became stages for local artists too, painters like Quincy, whose murals now graced the Indigo Crown's lobby. Each move was a brick in my legacy, one the Penroses couldn't claim. The world noticed. A magazine called me the new face of hospitality, and I let them print my name, Darla Penrose, not Vernon's daughter. At a gala for Vale Cares, I spoke to a room of donors, my voice steady, no longer the kid begging for a glance at the dinner table. "This is what a name can mean," I said, gesturing to Patsy, now a part-time concierge, beaming in the crowd. The applause was loud, but Patsy's proud nod was louder. I'd taken the Penrose name and made it a promise, not a prison. The past was gone, Vernon's grunts, Glynis's pity, Floyd's smirks, Marla's distractions. I was free, and my legacy was just beginning. Sitting in my office at the Saffron Vale, the city's lights twinkling beyond the window, I felt a quiet settle over me, like the hush after a long storm. The contracts were signed, Vale Cares was thriving, and Patsy's smile from the gala still lingered in my mind. I'd spent years chasing proof for the Penroses, proof for myself, that I was enough. But now, with the hum of my hotel around me, I realized the truth. My worth wasn't in their approval or even in the empire I'd built. It was in me, always had been, tucked away like a seed waiting for the right soil. That dinner, their rejection, Rupert's call, it all cracked me open, but what grew from it was peace. I thought about the kid I'd been, sketching hotel plans in a notebook, hiding them from Vernon's grunts and Glynis's sighs. She'd wanted to be seen, to matter. I wished I could tell her she already did, that her dreams were enough, that she didn't need their spotlight to shine. Building the Saffron Vale, the Indigo Crown, all of it wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about proving her right. Every guest who left smiling, every teen like Patsy who found a path, every letter like Thelma's, was a nod to that girl. She'd done it not because of the Penroses but despite them. I leaned back, my chair creaking, and let myself feel it, the weight of years falling away. The Penroses were a ghost now. Their voices faint. I didn't need to check if they'd called, didn't care if they'd read about Vale Cares or seen my name in print. Their world was small, brittle. Mine was wide, alive. Norris was probably in the kitchen, cursing a new recipe. Selma was likely charming a guest, her laugh echoing in the lobby. They were my family, along with Eunice, Grover, even Waldo and Mavis with their scones. They saw me not as a Penrose but as Darla, and that was enough. I stood, walking to the window, my reflection faint against the glass. The city stretched out, full of stories, and I was part of them, not as a shadow but as a light. The Saffron Vale glowed below, its doors open, welcoming. I'd built more than a hotel, I'd built a home for myself and for anyone who needed one. That was my validation, not a seat at Vernon's table or Glynis's approval. I smiled, small but real, and knew I was done running. I was here, whole, and that was the truest victory. Have you ever had to prove yourself to someone who didn't see you? Maybe a family member, a boss, or even yourself? I've learned that the only validation that matters is the one you give yourself, the one that says, "I'm enough." I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Share a moment when you stood tall, no matter who doubted you. If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. Keep building your own empire, whatever it looks like. You've got this. And you don't need anyone's permission to shine.